This conference will now be recorded.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We have a great lineup of speakers today. I'm Cecilia Rios, and I'll be moderating the webinar. I work for the City of San Jose, and I'm also the Secretary of the SWANA Gold Rush chapter. Christine Wolf is our host behind the scenes, keeping everything running smoothly. She's the Government Relations Manager at Recology. Today's webinar is Zero Waste Facility Design, which is session 5 of a 13-part webinar series brought to you for free by the SWANA Gold Rush chapter in Northern California. Our webinar series occurs once a month on a Friday from noon to 1 Pacific time, except today we have a 90-minute session scheduled. These webinars are free to members and non-members, so please let your friends and colleagues know about this series so they can join us. You can check out our website to see the full lineup at swananorcal.org/events. To learn more, you can register there and find links to the previous sessions as well, recordings. If you're not currently receiving announcement emails from us and you'd like to stay plugged in, send us an email at swanagoldrush@gmail.com. We'd also love to hear your feedback about today's webinar and any ideas you might have for future webinars. If you have SWANA certification that you need to maintain and you're registered for this webinar, you will be receiving 1 CEU for each webinar you attend. We give sincere thanks to our webinar series sponsors, Rethink Waste, Salinas Valley Recycle, Recology, and HDR. We have 3 sponsorship levels available that come with varying benefit levels. For more information, please contact Christine Wolf with Recology. Her email is cwolf@recology.com. There are 2 things that will improve your viewing and participation experience in this GoToMeeting platform. At the top center of your screen, you can click on the View Who's Talking arrows and change this to Hide Everyone in order to create more space for the screen share. On the top right of your screen, there's a chat icon. You can enter your questions in this chat box, and you have the option at the bottom to customize who sees your message. I encourage you to post your question to everyone because someone else might have the same question that you have. If your question is for a specific speaker, you can add that in your note. And if you'd rather be called on to ask your question out loud, you can add that in your note as well. After our 3 presenters, I'll direct your questions to our panelists. We're recording the entire webinar today, including the questions. The recording of the webinar and the presentations will be available on swananorcal.org. Attendees, please make sure that your mic is muted and that your webcam is turned off. This webinar series is possible with the teamwork of our SWANA webinar committee, which in addition to Christine and myself also includes Ruth Abbe of Abbe & Associates, who's presenting today, Kimberly Cook with Agerman, and Tim Lee of HDR Engineers. Our speakers today are Ruth Abbe, Principal at Abbe & Associates, Tim Flanagan, the General Manager for the Monterey Regional Waste Management District, and Kevin McCarthy, Principal at JRMA Architects and Engineers. Ruth Abbe is a zero waste practitioner with more than 25 years of experience in recycling and composting program and facility development and outreach and technical assistance. As the principal of Abbe & Associates, she's working with municipalities across the U.S. to develop the social and physical infrastructure to achieve zero waste. Tim Flanagan has been in the recycling and solid waste field for over 38 years. Tim's public sector experience started with the City of Palo Alto in their recycling and landfilling operations, and he worked for the County of Santa Clara in their solid waste planning department. Tim's private sector experience spanned 17 years with the waste management, serving as their Western Region Director of Recycling and as a district manager for a variety of collection and transfer station operations covering Northern and Southern California. Tim is currently the General Manager for the Monterey Regional Waste Management District and has oversight for all MRWMD operations and administrative services. This includes MRF recycling and composting operations, equipment maintenance, HHW, and the award-winning Last Chance Mercantile, engineering and landfilling site operations. Tim is on the SWANA International Executive Board of Directors, as well as the International Vice President. Tim has been a member of CRRA, California Resource Recovery Association, since 1982, and is a supporting member of Californians Against Waste. Mr. Kevin McCarthy has been in the solid waste and recycling industry for 30 years, based in the San Francisco Bay Area and working locally, regionally, and nationally with a primary focus on facility operations. As a principal at JRMA, he's responsible for recycling and solid waste facility programming and master planning, conceptual design, and financial feasibility study. He was the first executive director of the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, also known as Rethink Waste, and served for 9 years in a transformative role leading efforts bidding out franchise collection services and facility operations. Prior to SDWMA, Kevin held various senior-level management positions over a 13-year period working for waste management. Now I'll hand it over to Ruth, who will be our first presenter.
Thank you, Cecilia. Go ahead and share my screen. And is that coming through, Cecilia? Great. Yep. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be talking to you about policy drivers in high diversion and zero waste facility development. We work around the country and across the state on zero waste planning and programming. And it's really the policy development and program management that you'll hear really drives how facilities are designed, built, and funded. So excited to be a part of that. So my point of my talk today is to say, if you build it, they will come is actually a Hollywood fantasy. And instead, the driving point is that zero waste infrastructure is developed in response to policies and programs. You can see this beautiful picture from City of San Jose, ZWED facility, and we'll be talking a little bit more about some of those policy drivers. In California, we have a lot of policy drivers, so that's from the state, including Senate Bill 650, way back in 1977. Tim reminded me of this, was an early driver in facility development. It was a Senate bill that provided recycling grants and loans. But more recently, communities in California have been reacting to AB 939, AB 341, AB 1826, and now we're all engaged in Senate Bill 1383. Product stewardship has also been a guiding state policy that drives some facility and program development. So we're here today to kind of talk about that. And then municipalities also have policy drivers that significantly drive the development of zero waste and high diversion facilities, including, and we'll give some examples of universal recycling and organics collection, C&D ordinances, deconstruction ordinances, source separation requirements, zero waste goals, disposal bans, and rate structures. And we're going to talk a little bit also about taxes and fees as drivers for facility development. So I love this quote from Michael Gross, who's the Director of Sustainability for Zanker Recycling. And he talked to me about this way back, it was probably 15 or 20 years ago when we were convening the Zero Waste Brain Trust. And we said to him, hey, we interviewed a bunch of policy makers and also service providers and said, what is really driving your entrepreneurial approach to developing programs and facilities. And, Michael said at the time, it's not, sure we're entrepreneurial, but we respond to policy drivers from the communities that we serve. And so particularly the city of San Jose has developed a business tax on disposal of waste, incentivized recycling of all materials by paying contractors a rate per ton on anything that was recovered, developed the SEED program, the C&D materials recovery program that drove the development of Zanker Recycling as well as other C&D facilities in the area, and required multifamily dwellings diversion to 75%, which really drove a lot of the processing capacity, both for Zanker, ZWED, ZBEST, and a number of the other facility developers in the San Jose, Santa Clara area. So I'm going to talk about universal recycling and organics collection as a driver. So the city of Austin has a universal recycling ordinance, which they passed several years ago, but implemented slowly over time to give the market a chance to catch up, both in terms of developing the programs and facilities, and also requiring the generators to implement these recovery programs. So in Austin, the requirement is on the generator to recycle and compost. They're required to recycle and compost. And therefore, as soon as the city passed that recommendation, even before they developed the ordinance, the program managers in Texas Disposal Systems and other local operators began developing facilities. And this is a picture of the compost facility at the Texas Disposal System outside of Austin. They developed this facility directly in response to the city's initiation of a policy to require commercial businesses to recycle and all food service businesses to compost. So this is a direct result of that effort. C&D ordinances we have across the state and around the country. I wanted to highlight City of Los Angeles citywide construction and demolition debris ordinance. They require all haulers, including contractors, so all haulers and contractors, to have waste hauling permits. And then all C&D loads, all of them, must be processed at a C&D facility that's certified by the city. So guess what? There are a number of really state-of-the-art C&D recovery operations in the city of Los Angeles because every load is required to be processed. So these C&D facilities would not have been developed at such an aggressive rate if it were not for the C&D ordinance passed by the city. Similarly, deconstruction is an emerging policy development. Both the city of Portland, city of Palo Alto have deconstruction ordinances. In the city of Portland, they require structures built before 1940 that are seeking a demolition permit to be fully deconstructed as opposed to mechanically demolished. And this has driven an enormous amount of both deconstruction activity and also deconstruction facilities, including architectural salvage has increased dramatically in Portland, also building materials reuse sites. Source separation requirements are also significant in developing policies and programs and facilities. So in San Francisco requires all generators to source separate their refuse into recyclables and compostables and put them in the appropriate refuse containers. So this source separation requirement has driven Recology, the city service provider, to develop their significant amount of processing infrastructure, including, of course, composting. So this is a picture of their closed loop composting system in San Francisco, where food scraps are collected in restaurants. They've been developing this program over 20 years, and it's a universal in the city of San Francisco. Recology takes that material and creates organic compost that is then sold to farmers and wineries for the production of produce and wine that is then sold in San Francisco restaurants. So it's what we call kind of a closed loop system. The food scraps are collected, composted, and then sold back. But again, the composting facilities and the infrastructure would not have been developed by Recology if not for the driver from the city of San Francisco. A number of communities have zero waste goals. I wanted to highlight the 28 signatories of the C40 Zero Waste Declaration, which include Boston, New York, Milan, Paris, San Francisco, Sydney, Tokyo, and Toronto, just, you know, smattering across the world. But I wanted to explain what that zero waste goal is about. It's both to reduce the generation, the per capita generation of materials by 15% by 2030 compared to the 2015 base year. And that's all generation of all materials. So that's really the source reduction goal. So not just trash, but also recycling and compost. So reduce generation of materials, and then reduce the amount of materials going to municipal solid waste disposal by 50% by 2030. So not 50% of total, but 50% against the base year of 2015. So that's a significant lift. And then also to increase diversion to 70% by 2030. So diversion including all the materials that were not previously going to landfill in 2015. So as a result, those cities have developed impressive infrastructure. And this is just a snapshot from the city of Milan in Italy. And you can see at the top, the
Okay, can you hear me, Christine? I kind of hung up on myself for a minute. Cecilia?
Yeah.
Oh, phew.
Yes,
I was
back. I thought it was just me.
I just hung up on myself. Sorry, everybody. So really quickly, I wanted to show you this picture because at the very top is the beautiful Milanese food scrap collection program where food scraps are collected in, this is an apartment in Milan, put in their beautiful containers. They bring them down to the stairs in their composted bags, and then they have this significant amount of both composting and anaerobic digestion infrastructure specifically for food scraps. So just wanted to share that with you. And again, the driver was their zero waste goal. And now I will advance. Hey, all right. So the next one is disposal bans. And I wanted to highlight Alameda County's disposal ban. In 2019, Alameda County prohibited the disposal of plant debris in landfills. And so that applied to landscapers and large producers of yard trimmings, including property managers and municipalities and institutions. And right away, as soon as that kind of a ban is put into practice and materials are diverted from disposal, the beautiful compost facilities are developed. Now I wanted to turn over to rate structure. So rate structures can be both the rate structures at the generator level, so our own municipal rate structures for recycling, composting, and trash collection, but also at the facilities. And I wanted to highlight this one at the San Luis Obispo Cold Canyon landfill. So self-haulers are directed to bunkers for separating metal and yard trimmings and C&D. But the significant thing at Cold Canyon is that if you want to bypass the source separation area and go directly to the face of the landfill, you have to pay an extra fee, which they call a facility use fee. And the shorthand for that is an FU fee, just saying. As a result, 97% of self-haulers separate their materials. And this is a picture of that facility. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight the taxes and fees. So the first one I wanted to present was from the city of Berkeley in California. They actually pay Urban Ore, which is an organization in Berkeley, for every ton of material that they rescue from the city's transfer station. So Urban Ore staff are sited there at the transfer station, and they recover reusable items, including furniture, building materials. They are paid $47.74 for every ton of material that they take off the transfer station floor, which is the same as it costs the city of Berkeley that they pay for the landfill. So this is a win-win. Both the materials are taken away and reused and back into the economic mainstream, and the city would have paid the same amount to the landfill anyway, so this is a win-win for the city of Berkeley. And here's a picture of the Urban Ore Eco Park and their door collection. Urban Ore is famous for their doors. You can buy, you know, beautiful doors, full solid doors that came out of a Victorian household and kind of unique in the world. And then lastly, I wanted to go back to the city of San Jose. Again, Michael Gross was my inspiration for this talk. And I wanted to point out the city of San Jose's disposal facility tax. So beginning in 1992, so for quite some time, every person engaged in the business of operating a solid waste disposal facility shall pay a monthly disposal tax in the amount of $13 per ton. $13 per ton may not sound like a lot, but it was a huge driver for infrastructure development in the city of San Jose. And so I'm showing a couple of facilities that were driven to develop the program as a result of that fee, including Zanker Recycling and ZBest. So the upshot of my talk is that if you adopt high diversion zero waste policies, they will build it. So that's the end of my portion of the program. And so I will stop sharing and turn it over to, I'm going to go to you, Christine, for Tim's slides. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And I think you can just grab it, right?
Why don't you pass it to me?
Okay, I will make presenter. There we go.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Tim, are you ready?
Good. I am. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tim Flanagan. I'm general manager here at the Monterey Regional Waste Management District. You can start with the first slide if you get a chance.
Oh, yep.
And
Just
I wanted to
1 second. But go ahead and introduce yourself, Tim. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
On my end.
No problem. I wanted at the front end to thank one of my teammates, Angela Goebbels, on our call here this morning, who helped produce the presentation you're seeing. So anything good she should get credit for, and any mistakes are probably mine. So just to let you know when the slides come up. So
Hey, Cecilia, will you make me the organizer again? And the presenter?
So as we're waiting for that, I'll do some background. The district was founded in 1950 and 1951. We'll be celebrating our 70th year next year. We're a publicly owned and operated facility. Of note, we receive no special taxes or fees. So we really are an enterprise district. So we're run most like a small business. So the only way that we generate revenue is from what drives in over the scale, what we process and sell as recyclable material or renewable energy, or what we sell to the market from our landfill gas. We're about a $32 million a year enterprise. We have a landfill capacity that exceeds 100 years. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So you go to the first slide that gives an overview of the district, the aerial view. And we serve the Central Coast region here. So of note here is our role here today on this presentation is we're sort of where the rubber meets the road. Ruth gave a good description about the policy drivers. Kevin's going to talk about the facilities in the future in design, and we're a direct result of those policy drivers. So we like to say we're where the rubber meets the road, and that's literally because our mile-long access road was made from recycled tires. So it's rubberized asphalt. So we really are sort of an entity that has that as part of its DNA. If you go to the next slide, this was our solid waste handling practices at the turn of the last century. And despite what Kevin will say later, that is not me standing behind the cart in this picture. But this is Lover's Point, for those of you that have been down in Monterey, in Pacific Grove. And there's literally was an ordinance in Pacific Grove that said that you have to dump your trash below mean high tide so the trash could take it out into the ocean. So an interesting beginning for our solid waste practices on the peninsula. You go to the next slide, about 30 years later, we haven't made much improvement. If those of you have been to Monterey, this is on Highway 1 driving down into Monterey. That's in what was now Sand City. This was an open burning dump right along the Pacific Ocean, which is now the Monterey Marine Sanctuary. And so in 1951, there was a decision that was made that perhaps we ought to move on and perhaps do a little bit better with our solid waste management practices. The next slide is an overview of our jurisdictional boundaries, where we extend a long way up from Moss Landing all the way down south of Big Sur. So we have a lot of area to cover. And again, to remark, we're a rural area, but not a lot of population, density, but we've managed to make our programs work. But we'll start with where we were in our landfill. If we go to the next slide, we'll see where we started. And this is out in 1965, where we started at our current location. And even back then, the district was what we would say are early adapters of concepts in solid waste. And this, our agency lined our landfill cells pre-Subtitle D, almost a full decade before Subtitle D required us to do that. We installed a landfill gas to energy system in 1983, well ahead of the clean air provisions. And again, this was for a small, medium-sized landfill that we adopted these. So we've had a history of adopting these types of policies early. We go to the next slide. You'll see that we incorporate a large, this is part of our first landfill gas to energy system, first engine that was installed here in 1983. It's a little slide later will show you some of the advancements to move on. So we go to the next slide, and we'll show that we're very fortunate in where we were sited in a large agricultural area away from urban growth boundaries, but we've always been conscious of who our neighbors are and what we do. And our culture, we think, here has helped us to drive our diversion qualities, even though we have 100+ years of landfill life. So if we move on to the next slide, Ruth mentioned this. This is one of the first curbside recycling programs in the state, circa 1982. This was a SB 650 grant, which Ruth identified as one of the policy drivers and led to our adoption of this program here at the district in the early 80s. The next slide will show our first efforts in composting, which we started in the late 1980s. We're fortunate here in Monterey to be aligned in a nearby agricultural community. So we have a good outlet for our markets, but being that it's an agricultural community, it's forced us to put an emphasis on quality and quality control, which has served us in our later years as we had to move into other materials for composting. So we've had that emphasis with a ag market, which remarkably, of course, is pretty persnickety about what they get. Ruth showed in her slides urban ore, and if the next slide we'll put up on the screen, we were borrowed extensively, and Urbanware was very helpful in the district's early involvement. This is actually a recycled building which was on site, which we repurposed to be the original Last Chance Mercantile. This shows that you can start small. It started with the idea of the general manager at the time, David Myers, who we recognized there was a lot of material going directly to the landfill that had a purpose for reuse. And we started with an auction, and the monthly or quarterly auction grew to a monthly auction, which grew to the repurposing of the store. And we'll see in a couple slides what the Last Chance Mercantile looks like now. The next slide will show that we've always had advocacy and education as part of our plan here. If you can tell on the left, the first slide, first district sponsored Earth Day, that's probably a little after Earth Day. So that's more like the 80s, I think, my favorite decade. But so you can see that we were out in the community, and then where we've evolved to in our Small Planet tour, and that's our former public education manager, Kimberly Herring, who got literally hundreds and hundreds of letters from school kids in Monterey from their public education outreach efforts she did, teaching them about zero waste practices in recycling. So Ruth mentioned policy drivers, AB 939. We go to the next slide. The district built a 100,000 clear foot span building in the mid 90s, which was at the time state of the art. This picture shows it after it's had a couple decades of use. This is what we call MRF 1.0. This was based on our need to target self-haul and C&D material for recycling, which was the district's efforts at the front end of AB 939. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that at the time, it was state of the art. This is very manually intensive labor. All our folks had to positively pull materials off of the sort line, and we were targeting those heavy C&D type materials that were making their way out to landfill, as well as a few of the recyclable items that went through there. There was not a lot of mechanization associated with this, but at the state of the time in the mid 90s, it was state of the art, and we've moved on. This was one of the first and only public facilities that a gentleman named Mike Ellinger helped develop for us. The district, next slide. The district in the mid 90s put forth about a $20 million bond. And with that, we developed the MRF, the Last Chance Mercantile. And what we'll see after that is the HHW facility. So that small outbuilding that you saw a couple slides ago morphed into this. This is about 7,000 square feet inside building for our folks to repurpose and redirect, reuse material. We go to the next slide. You'll see that our staff worked in the building. We work on about 70% comes in the way of donations, and about 30% comes from salvage off the tip floor. The interesting part of our operation here is unlike Berkeley, we don't have a lot of those gorgeous Victorians. Our client base is more than 50% based in the itinerant farm worker community that supports the Monterey Bay agricultural areas. And this is one of the reasons why, hence our name, Last Chance, we keep our prices low. That's part of the client deck that we service. And about another 20 to 30% are those folks that are resellers in their own right, buy our products and go back out into their community. Last year, we did over 65,000 transactions at our store. The next slide will show our household hazardous waste facility, which was built at the same time and paired with the I should say, the Last Chance Mercantile. And we divert those household hazardous materials that are still in the container and identified for repurposing. We're given away for free at the Last Chance Mercantile. This saves the district somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 annually from having to treat them as a hazardous waste. and can be repurposed for members in the community that need paint, cleaning items, etc., so they don't have to buy it new. So the next generation, if you flip the slide, is what was coming up next for the district, and how do we get to the next generation of recycling. And we were approached in 2012 by Zero Waste Energy that wanted to know if we would be able to make use of a pilot program for them. And we had the first anaerobic digester in the state of California located at our facility here in Monterey, which we were very proud of, a small rural community. It was sized between, to start with, about 5,000 tons a year. It grew to about 7,000 tons a year by tweaking the design throughput for that. It was a pilot program, so it was originally supposed to run 5 years. We ran it 1 extra year, actually. We were allowed to go forward and do that. It was very successful. It was a dry anaerobic digester, copper firm material from, I should say copper firm technology from Zero Waste Energy. It was a batch process. Underneath that was a 90,000 gallon tank of percolate, which was spread over the material, which helped those break down in 4 separate bunkers. And then those were in the residency time between 19 and 21 days. They were pulled out and then finished for composting on our site next door. So we were very, very proud of this. However, we outgrew it, and our next generation of anaerobic digestion would have to be perhaps somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 times larger. So what did we do as we needed for the new requirements for recycling and waste reduction? So if we flip to the next slide, one of the things that we talked about, which you heard Ruth mention, is that we were able to put our member agencies together in a modern franchise collection agreement. The agreements that we had on the peninsula were pretty old. They went from the late 70s and 80s. We developed a modern franchise agreement. We put that out to bid. The awardee was Green Waste Recovery. And since Green Waste was not located in the Monterey area, our plan at the district was to build the infrastructure for any collection company to come in and utilize. So the district sold bonds, developed the truck yard, maintenance facility, call center, and as you see there, CNG fueling stations for them. It's time fill and fast fill. So this saved our district ratepayers money by allowing for more efficiency, and the trucks end their day and they park it at the same location. And our ratepayers are not repaying for capital investment that the third-party hauler has to make. So we considered this a prudent investment for a 30 to 50 year time frame. Next slide. At the same time, we developed our MRF 2.0. And as technology developed and as our requirements for diversion expanded, we developed a RFQ, had a competitive procurement. We ended up selecting BHS, bulk handling system. And this facility is designed to handle combined over 160,000 tons a year of material through it. It's designed to handle MSW, single stream, and C&D recycling. Currently, we're processing single stream and C&D only. One of the things Ruth talked about, if you build it, they may not come. We found out that once we built the single stream facility, we ended up receiving material on a regional basis, and it was designed for about 15,000 tons a year, and now we're processing close to 70,000 tons a year of single stream. So that was something we didn't quite anticipate. One of the takeaways, or one of the guidelines that we would provide as a viewpoint here, is that we've also added upgrades to this. Even though it's only a couple years old, we found that we needed to invest in material. So, and additional equipment, I should say. Next slide is our landfill gas to energy system. which is what, if you remember the original one that was mounted on a trailer, this is what it looks like now. Unique thing here is we produce 5 megawatts of power, and we are going to be selling about half of that power to our neighbor facility, which is Monterey One Water Sewer Treatment Plant, and they are going to be making renewable water from renewable energy. And that's a sort of a unique thing for us to do. So next slide, the district today, and then we'll get to some takeaways, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. McCarthy. We're very fortunate in that our folks in 1963 decided to purchase 500 acres. And so we're very fortunate to have that large acreage for the landfill, for our resource recovery components of composting, of energy recovery, of concrete crushing and recovery, of our material recovery facility, to be able to have room to develop a truck yard and parking and fueling facility, last chance in HHW. So that really spoke to good planning in the original development of our landfill and district. The district site today, if you go to our website, mrwmd.org, you go to the next slide, you're able to click on our areas and get mini tours of our locations. I'd urge you to do that. They're anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes long, gives you a little background on each of our facilities. One of the things I didn't mention is that you can see we're surrounded by agriculture. We employ a full-time falconer on our site to help make sure that even though we're a mile away from the ocean, we don't have our seagulls as our neighbors. So next slide, as we talk about where we're heading and how are we heading towards zero waste and what will this facility do? We know that there are going to be more expensive diversion activities. We understand that the organic processing is going to be accomplished with extensive air emissions and water control. So that probably means that it's going to be done under roof and under cover. We know that there'll be an offset, hopefully, of the cost of processing in energy and or gas generation, which we'll be able to make for sale. And that we're going to look to partner with our member agency next door in the wastewater treatment facility to perhaps make use of one of their spare digesters. So we have a lot going on in the future. So what does that mean for our district our size? If we go to the next slide, it requires us to spend a considerable amount of capital. So this is sort of our 5-year projection, and we're looking to spend close to $41 million in capital over the next 5 years, really just to keep up with what we have to do in the way of current compliance and diversion activities. And that means that if for an agency like us, we have to be very, very prudent about how we spend money and very, very prudent on how we develop our business development to make sure that the business rolls through our gates and make sure that we keep the funding available for us to do that. Next slide. We couldn't really have a presentation without discussing about where are we now in a COVID-19 world. Unfortunately, as many agencies probably have experienced, we projected a significant downturn in revenue in fiscal year 2021. We projected about a 20% downturn in revenue. We're experiencing probably somewhere between 10 and 15%. We had to have a reduction in our headcount because of that. And between both voluntary and forced layoffs, we actually have had a 20% staffing reduction since last year. So it's impacted all of our members on our site, unfortunately. So we'll finish up with some takeaways. I think I'm going just a little bit long here. But as we go to these takeaways for a district our size, where the rubber meets the road, we've done a lot of work with the, if you go back to public-private partnerships, we've been able to leverage our permits, our size of our facility, in our infrastructure to bring on private sector partners that have areas of expertise that we don't have: composting, concrete crushing, gas recovery and maintenance. The old adage of measure twice, cut once is what we've practiced. We've been practical, spend our money wisely. We have to have a lot of patience and persistence. Several of the projects you see were more than a decade in development. It comes down to really, again, our people and our governance. We've had excellent political leadership. I can't emphasize that enough. And you don't have to be a big city to work towards zero waste. When it goes back to our governance, I'll mention this and then I'll end this. We've had one board member on our board of directors for more than 50 years, Gary Bales, who started as a city manager and has stayed on. And Gary is a contributing member to our board now. And I think that says something about the Monterey area and the level of commitment from our people in our area for spend 50 years on a board of directors being a sponsor. So with that, thank you for your time. I'll take questions and I'll turn it over to my colleague there, Mr. McCarthy.
Okay, Cecilia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
I'm glad you're up.
do you have the, let's see here.
You want me to share your PowerPoint?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you can do that. I can ask you to move it forward if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine. Let me find it.
Okay, you could take it back to the beginning. There you go. All right, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I appreciate you joining the webinar today, and a special thanks to Cecilia and Christine for all their help putting this together, and for the Gold Rush chapter for hosting this entire webinar series. Yeah, really appreciated listening to what Ruth had to say. You know, without those policy drivers and all of the hard work that's put in by people lobbying and legislating in Sacramento and every city, ultimately we wouldn't end up with these beautiful facilities. So thanks to everybody who contributes in that process. And Tim gave you just a great story. It's one of the true success stories for the development of a facility. And I think the word legacy comes to mind. I can't say that I've seen Tim near a horse, but I probably seen him wearing a baseball glove from the turn of the century. He's a true old timer. You can get me later for that one, Tim. So my presentation is going to focus really on what are the elements and the components of evolving facilities. How are we getting these facilities to evolve to meet higher diversion? How do they continue to evolve to be an asset to the community? And how are they incorporating innovation, whether that's renewable energy, education, or whatever it might be. Next slide. Just a quick background on J.R. Miller. We've been around since 1982, so we've been designing facilities pre-939. So some of the very first transfer stations and MRFs in California and along the West Coast have been designed by our company. We have a staff of 55, a couple of offices in California and 3 around the country. And in total, we've designed over 150 solid waste facilities. Next slide. What some people may not know about our company is besides designing solid waste and organics facilities, we also design commercial aviation facilities, food processing operations, and all types of different industrial operations. Next slide. So you'll see a couple of references here in this presentation to John Muir, and this may seem to be a quote from out of left field, but when you stop and think about this quote, it's really about interconnectedness, integration, functionality, how things are connected together, and it's the same is true when you design a facility. Your waste streams, your customer flows, your buildings, your equipment. There's all these different things that if you try to pull apart one of them, or if you don't properly address one of them, the whole system breaks down. You don't really have a highly functioning facility. Next slide. Another way to kind of look at this is when you're designing a facility, there's all these puzzle pieces. I was part of designing this education center at the Shoreway Environmental Center. And one of the things that we came up with as a concept is when we brought students, young people, adults through the facility, we wanted to introduce this idea that things are interconnected. In this case, we are talking about resource conservation and really how there's all these different puzzle pieces that fit together to, kind of tell the story. And so again, it's the same with a facility. There's all these different puzzle pieces of components, elements, criteria, parameters, whatever it is that you're considering as a community, that you're trying to put all these pieces together to make for a successful facility. Next slide. So what are those key pieces of the puzzle? So I'm going to go through three key areas. High diversion. So how are facilities being designed to achieve high diversion? Community asset. This is an interesting one. We're all working in an industry where essentially it's a public works service. It's public works infrastructure, and very much unlike other types of public infrastructure, whether it's sewer, water, electricity. Those aren't facilities that the public normally accesses. And so it's critically important that when we design facilities that we have to address public use, public access. And that not only adds sort of complexity to what you're doing, but there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity to engage the public, to provide education. So I'll talk a little bit about and provide examples of that. And then lastly, environmental innovation. Going back to what I brought up in the beginning. There's all kinds of different ways we can introduce facility features, educational displays, any number of things to not only support and demonstrate environmental practices, but to sort of use them in ways that maybe save the facility money or create operational improvements. So let's go to the next slide. So high diversion. This is a site plan from the city of Berkeley. We recently completed a feasibility study for them, and we ultimately ended up with two concept plans. And this is a concept plan that we call the single building concept. And I wanted to just introduce this to people because this was something discussed at great length in Berkeley, and it was really the idea as to whether you should have a separate transfer station and a separate MRF, or whether they really should be one integrated building, with the idea being that, maybe if you have a single building, the operations are kept separate in terms of traffic flow and material processing. But what if 20 years from now you wanted to, reallocate the space or do something different, have less transfer space, and have more material processing? You can do that if you design your structures the right way. So this is just the concept of that single building for the future City of Berkeley facility. Next slide. Another way you can consider achieving high diversion is how you design the interior space. This is a picture of the Tacoma facility before it opened. It's a big, massive, what we call large flat floor. There's no differences in grade in the floor. And so really it's a facility that allows for the maximum flexibility for separation of materials. And so, in the old days, it was one single pile of trash. And now through policy, we're creating all these separate streams of material. And so this is really the most basic thing you can do in designing a facility. If you don't have any material handling equipment or processing equipment on site, you want to at least create that space to separate materials. The picture to the right of it is just one of these funny things. I collect pictures of facilities when I travel around, and this is at the Seattle Public Utilities South facility. They have these portable signs. These have these concrete blocks with casters. I just thought it was a kind of a cool way to move signs around your tipping floor. You may move where you have people drop off wood, or you maybe you change material that people are going to separate. there's a very simple operational practice to accomplish that. Next slide. This is a pretty cool feature that we're starting to see more in facility design, and it's to incorporate a loading dock into a transfer station. You typically think of loading docks with MRFs, loading out commodities. But in the case of the Berkeley facility and some others that we've done recently, we've designed a loading dock right off the tipping floor. You may ask, why is that important? It really gets back to ease of handling, flexibility of handling, safely handling all the different types of materials that customers may bring. Oftentimes, customers are bringing in, appliances, mattresses, tires, e-waste, any number of things, and it becomes, pretty unwieldy and often unsafe to handle those materials. So this picture is just depicting that we've got a loading dock designed off the back corner of the facility. So this is just another way of demonstrating a way that you can facilitate more safe, operationally efficient, and expanded ways to recover materials in a transfer station. Next picture, or next slide. There's been a lot of conversations, particularly recently, about in markets and what's happening in China and what we can ship or not ship to China. Even Tim mentioned just 2 years later, he's evolving his equipment. So there's a critical role, and we've got a number of great equipment manufacturers across the country that do a great job expanding their technology and their capabilities, whether it's using robots to sort commodities or quality control materials, optical sorting units, which have been around for a while now, but are getting better and better at sorting materials. So this range of how we achieve diversion can be done from very simple operational design features to educational ways, and obviously the use of technology. Next slide. I think what's really exciting from technology and SB 1383 is we're starting to see organics recovery, organics processing technologies incorporated directly into facilities. The picture on the left is the rendering of a 4-digester anaerobic digestion system at a transfer station in North County, San Diego. The picture to the right is the actual construction picture. There's 2 digesters that are going in. This should be operational in the next couple of months, but it's really exciting to see that we can design these systems right into a transfer and MRF processing facility. These are very capital-intensive systems, but obviously there's a lot of transportation cost savings to co-locate these type of operations. Next slide. So community assets. So I mentioned earlier, this is a really unique part of our business, is that we have to handle the public invariably through our facilities, and that's an operational challenge, but it's also an opportunity. For the proposed future Berkeley facility, we incorporated something that's pretty unique. It's actually a 3-story administration building, and we've dedicated an entire floor to an education center, community meeting space, and to an artist studio. There's a long history in Berkeley with salvaging materials and reuse art, and so this obviously takes allocating space. Maybe you can't do all of these things in a single building, but we're pretty excited to have the opportunity to put this all in one floor in a building at an operating transfer station. So next slide. Another part of sort of that connection to the community is reuse art, or reuse of materials. These are 2 good examples, the left picture and the center picture of examples in the Pacific Northwest, King County. Those are bicycle rims mounted to that retaining wall. Seattle South facility, again, reuse of street signs, pretty cool. And to the right, 2 friends of mine in the industry who were part of a reuse clothing fashion show. So again, these are just ways to not only do some diversion of materials, but do some creative reuse and educate people about the value of reducing or reusing materials upstream of recycling. Next picture. Excuse me, I have so many pictures, I keep saying next picture. Next slide. This slide, again, another example of public art. I always like to incorporate things I see and learn from other places. The 2 pictures in the left and center are from Ashland, Oregon. The picture on the left is actually art in the watershed itself, and it's pretty cool. It's pictures of the flora and fauna. It's all along a trail network, and we took that idea and we've incorporated it into our Berkeley design, which I'll show you in a minute. The picture in the middle, again, this is a watershed, so it's the reuse of recycled glass in a walkway. And then Recology for decades has had a huge focus on reuse art, and this is a sculpture garden at one of their facilities. Next slide. So environmental innovation. So the most obvious ways around that are, it could be use of wind turbines, renewable energy. Our Berkeley design includes wind turbines for any of you that have been along that part of the Berkeley facility near the bay. It's very windy. The picture on the right is a real-world facility, the Shoreway facility in San Carlos, where they covered both the MRF and transfer station buildings with photovoltaics. Next slide. These are two renderings of facilities under design. Again, the one on the left, it comes from Berkeley. Pretty cool use of these photovoltaic panels, canopies that can go over operational areas. So they're pretty cool to put over a drop-off area or a buyback center. So you're providing comfort and shading, weather protection for customers. It also helps with stormwater management. But these panels are made from PV glass, so you're generating renewable power from them. The picture on the right is a proposed facility in King County. I don't know a lot about this technology, but these are building integrated photovoltaics. So what looks like the skin of the building, that glass material, are essentially photovoltaics generating renewable power. Next slide. We can go to the next slide. Cecilia, are you advancing the slides?
Just in case there's an issue, I'm going to make myself the presenter and get your slide up.
Okay.
Oops.
Sorry about the delay, everybody.
Technical difficulties. Cecilia, are you still on? I'm having some screen sharing issues. Kevin, are you at your computer?
Yes, I am. Who should I click on?
I will make you the presenter. And then if you share your screen at the bottom, there should be an option for that. And pull yourself up. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay. Let me advance my slides. Nobody get a headache.
It's nice to see all those nice images again.
All right. So this relates to what I was just talking about in terms of that watershed art. In the city of Berkeley, if you look at this drawing on the right, this landscape architecture drawing, the facility backs up against an urban creek, Cornelius Creek. So we have a 20-foot buffer line off the center line of the creek. And so there's an opportunity there for a creek buffer. So we created a creek walk near the entrance of the facility. Again, this is the proposed facility where the folks can enter that area, and we would expect to see art sculpture all throughout this sort of watershed area. You can't really talk about environmental innovation without talking about environmental education, and the Shoreway facility in San Carlos is a fantastic example of introducing resource conservation more broadly, and not just speaking specifically about recycling. The picture on the left is a very large repurposed tank. It came from a farm in the Salinas Valley, and it's used to collect rainwater off the roof of the transfer station. It's wrapped with different images of sustainable landscaping, sustainable harvesting. And so, again, the messaging is really about resource conservation. The picture in the center is a hallway shot of an exhibit focusing on resource conservation. Picture on the right is actually the lobby to the education center area. You can see the word wall that I mentioned earlier. So how do these puzzle pieces fit together for you? I'm just focusing on these three areas: high diversion, community asset, environmental innovation. There's certainly other areas that are critical to consider when you design a facility, but I wanted to go through a couple of examples of how our clients are addressing fitting these puzzle pieces together. For Berkeley, they have a very old buyback drop-off center with lots of crossing traffic, outdoor operations. It works because they have a lot of repeat customers, so they sort of figure out how to run the gauntlet and make it work. What we presented to them were a couple of concepts. The one on the right is really an open, more of a plaza. You have a center drive aisle. The buyback center is on the left. It's right adjacent to the MRF. The drop-off activities are on the right, and you can see the canopies with the photovoltaics over those areas. So this is obviously dramatically improved, and hopefully Berkeley's able to implement this in the future. Similarly, the Berkeley transfer station is very, very old, poor lighting, confined space, difficult access, lots of mixing of heavy equipment and self-haul vehicles. So the picture on the right you saw earlier, it's a picture of a much more expansive, better lit, better signed transfer station. Again, offering more ability to separate materials on the floor, the use of the loading dock for recovery of materials, and just simply a safer environment. This operation is actually in Utah. It's again a very outdated, undersized transfer station, and with a lot of outdoor activities. The appliances are handled outdoor. A lot of the universal waste are handled outdoor. So it's really not exactly the most environmentally friendly situation, and certainly it could be improved significantly. What that facility will turn into is something that looks like this: a single building with separate entrances for the commercial traffic and the public traffic. Inside the building are the separate tipping areas for the different customers. There's also drop-off activities inside. For many different reasons, the client wanted to put all of the operational areas, the public drop-off, the HHW, the solid waste disposal, all of that inside of one building, and so that's what this building reflects. I wanted to show this picture because, there's probably some of you out there in pretty small rural areas, and you may have something like this. It may not exactly be configured this way, but essentially it's an old Z-wall where you have some roll-off boxes that sit below a concrete pad, and people just dump material into these roll-off boxes. So, very simple, very old school, very few environmental controls. If you're fortunate to have some space, you may have an area like down in the left portion of the picture here where you can drop off a few items. But it functions okay, but certainly lots of room for improvement. Excuse me. The next picture here is what could it look like? This is that same facility. We've added canopies over the unloading areas with the PV glass. We've upgraded this recycling center to sort of a circular path drive-through. All of the various drop-off bins are covered and again provides a convenience for customers. We've added an educational kiosk down here in the yellow. There's a rainwater harvest tank. So there's just little things. You see all these big, beautiful pictures and you think these are all really expensive facilities, but they often are retrofits of existing facilities or very small facilities where making one small improvement for very rural area, it may make a very big difference. So I don't want that point to be lost. The last thing I want to end on is just to show you quickly the evolution of a large transfer station facility. This one in Escondido, California. It started with a transfer station. A MRF was added. The facility is now in the process of adding this organics receiving and processing area, again, really to meet SB 1383 requirements. The addition of the anaerobic digestion area, and ultimately, again, just a close-up picture of that facility and adding anaerobic digesters to the transfer station complex. So very exciting. I'm sure somebody's going to go, wow, look at that horrible traffic up in the left. Well, that's the reality of sometimes of traffic retrofits. It's tricky to integrate these kind of improvements, but this will be an amazing facility when it's complete in the next couple of months. So with that, I know we're going to take questions. My friend John Muir that I'm standing next to, if you haven't been out to the John Muir National Historic Site, it's in Martinez. It's an amazing place, and you can get a picture of John Muir. So with that, I know Tim, Ruth, and I have shared lots of information. You will get copies of our presentations, and you'll have our contact information. So, any questions we can't answer today, we certainly would welcome the chance to address them offline. So with that, I'm going to, let's see.
Thank you, Kevin. So at this point, anybody that has any questions, you can go ahead and enter your questions in the chat box. You can put them to everyone. And if you would rather be called on, we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. Just let us know that you would like to do that so we don't get everyone doing it at the same time. So do we have any questions? Looks like I don't see any questions. I know I wanted to know, maybe I could ask the panelists. So if I'm in a jurisdiction, I'm either a resident or I work for a city, how would I get started if I wanted a zero waste facility to be in my city? Where do I start?
Ruth, you want to start with that?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, phew, okay. It's been a little glitchy today, the audio on this on this webinar, so sorry everybody. Yeah, I think that with regards to initiating zero waste development infrastructure, there are two ways to go. Of course, Tim presented the policy drivers for an organization that is actually owning and managing the facilities. So that's actually one way. And with regard to that, Kevin was also the director of an organization that went ahead and condemned, kind of took over through eminent domain, a private sector operation specifically so the facility could have the policy and program drivers that agency wanted to see. That was the South Bayside Waste Management Authority. So that's two examples of organizations, public sector organizations that have actually taken the initiative of zero waste facility development, high diversion facility development through public ownership. So obviously that's one way to go. City of Napa has done the same thing up at their facility. They've taken over the private sector operation ownership. They still have private sector operation. But with regards to the drivers for communities where they do not own the infrastructure and then do not intend to own the infrastructure, that they would move forward with setting policies, as we do in the City of Austin. City of Austin owns some facilities, but they don't own the compost facilities. Those are all driven by public policy. So requiring source separation, requiring universal collection from the generators initiated the private sector investment. So that's one policy way, is to pass a mandatory recycling or mandatory organics ordinance. And then the third way that I just want to mention for now is to contract for those services. So many jurisdictions throughout California do not necessarily own and operate their own facilities. However, they do contract for services through their franchise agreements or their other agreements through their private sector service providers. And so City of San Francisco is the good example of that, where they have worked hand in hand with Recology to develop a very impressive amount of zero waste infrastructure, but the city does not have an ownership stake in that at all. They just provide the policy direction and rate incentives to Recology to invest. So those would be the 3 strategies that I would use to get zero waste infrastructure in my town.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. We have a question about urban ore facilities and concepts in North America. Does anyone know how many of these there are in the U.S. or North America?
Well, the first answer I would give is there's not enough. And Ruth probably has a specific answer, but there's not enough of these facilities in the country. That would be my first answer.
And there's a little bit more than you might think. So what happens with both the Last Chance Mercantile, which Tim presented on, and Urban Ore in Berkeley, those have been developed specifically through public policy guidance, both the entrepreneurial approach in Berkeley, which was a public partnership, essentially, and then in Monterey, where it was a driver by the public agency. But if you look at transfer stations and drop-off facilities around the country, you see pieces of what Urban Ore and Monterey Regional have. The El Cerrito Recycling Center in El Cerrito, California is a great example of a drop-off center that has many of those features that you would like to see in a multi-material drop-off facility. Reuse stores, the restores of St. Vincent de Paul often serve a similar function to Urban Ore on building materials. On the building materials side, you see a lot of salvage, architectural salvage operations across the country. But if you really want to spur diversion, some sort of policy intervention, whether it's actually paying for salvaging at a transfer station or investing in that salvaging as they've done at Monterey, really would ensure that the materials that would otherwise be disposed are diverted from disposal. So I've documented around the country the little put and takes that you'll see at rural transfer stations, where folks will separate cans and bottles, newspapers, organics, but then also leave reusable items out for other people to take. So that's kind of a common practice at some of the more rural or suburban transfer stations. So, I think we need, as I agree with Tim, we need more of them, but I think there are ways to do it, and we don't have to do everything in one place. A lot of building materials reuse yards happen separately from clothing or household good reuse that we see at, St. Vincent de Paul or Goodwill or elsewhere. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. In San Jose, we also have the Habitat for Humanity Restore operation.
Absolutely.
That has similar use. So thank you, Ruth. A question for the panelists. Do you have any recommendations for expanding these facilities at municipally owned landfills? Is there any potential to do that?
Absolutely. I showed the example of the very small scale, low tech version at the Cold Canyon landfill in San Luis Obispo. So where they basically require through rate incentives their self-haulers to separate. But most landfills that are accessible to the public have some kind of drop-off potential. I know Buena Vista landfill in Santa Cruz. Of course, Monterey has quite an extensive resource recovery park. But if there is room at the landfill for self-haulers to separate, that is a great opportunity. And then the facilities could be co-located with transfer stations, co-located with landfills, or standalone facilities. And what have you seen, Kevin, at landfills, developing these types of facilities at landfills?
Well, I'll let me just kick that question over to Tim, because Tim's been living that for a long time.
Yeah, I guess what I would say to the questioner is to start organically, is to start small with these. And I think Ruth mentioned that a number of these landfills, you don't need a lot of space to start with, and build on the momentum internally and set that aside. Or even better is to seek some third-party partners, perhaps, to develop that with, if you're not able to afford to do it on your own. I think there is a lot of potential at landfills, typically, to have space to do this. And the items of concern you want to make sure of are safety concerns, to make sure that you're salvaging or recovery activities. You're not traipsing in front of live traffic, as Kevin pointed out, and some of the designs that he's now promoting have those distinct separations. And that was something that the district did in the mid-90s, is to keep the general public off of the face of the landfill and tip inside an enclosed building. It not only facilitated diversion of material, which was its primary target, but it also kept close to 90% of the vehicles from intermingling with the commercial traffic or the hauling traffic to go up to the landfills, and made for a safer arrangement for the residents to dispose of their material.
Yeah, I would just add, there's a lot of examples of expanded infrastructure for transfer and processing at landfills all across the San Francisco Bay Area. You have old landfills that Newbie Island, Zanker Road, Sunnyvale Smart Station, the Richmond facility. There's lots of examples of it. I think you have an opportunity with SB 1383, because you essentially have to do a gap analysis that says how many tons of organics are you diverting now, and what do you have to divert to hit the 50% and the 75% targets. And I think once you sort of know what that gap is, if you're willing to give up the airspace at your landfill to dedicate an operation, then it's a smart place to put it, because you already have the same, usually the same trucks already going there. And so there's a lot of economies of scale to take advantage of.
Thank you. There was one question in here that I think has already been answered by John Hamilton regarding the San Diego facility. So thank you, Kevin, and Tim also for answering that one. I guess I have one more question. If there's nothing else from the public, everyone on the call, you can enter your question. We have about 5 minutes left. One question I have is, there's new issues nowadays with odor and air emissions and greenhouse gas, climate change and carbon sequestration and water runoff. Have you run into any challenges, Tim or Kevin or Ruth? Do you know of any challenges that have existed, and we should be planning for those if we are looking to build a facility?
Yes, absolutely. I'll turn it over to Kevin after this. The first thing that I would discuss, yes, there are odor issues challenged around any of these facilities, whether it's a solid waste facility or a liquid waste facility. These are waste products that by their very nature generate odors from them. And if there's a mission that I would have, it would be the need to sort of protect these facilities, such as they are, from the encroachment of urban infrastructure around them. We were fortunate to be located out in a rural area. However, there is pressure on the neighboring community to grow outside their boundary and go closer to the landfill and the sewage treatment plant. And I have to tell you that that is not good land use policy. So I think it puts the onus on the operators to run very tight operations, very efficient operations, to be responsible with the members of the public around them, engage them in communication, have them come out and do tours of your facility, see what you're doing. But I think you're right that there are going to be competing efforts around managing these organic wastes, and by their very nature, they will generate odors, and those odors have the presence to have conflicts either on a regular basis or irregular basis with surrounding communities.
Yeah, I'd add a couple things to that. I mean, unfortunately, at the very time that our regulations are ramping up to expand diversion programs, primarily around organics, the regulatory environment is not in sync. We have air district rules being proposed in the Bay Area that are they're perfectly reasonable from the perspective of enclosing operations and doing some things that make some basic sense, but they're sort of going in a direction that is going to be super expensive for the industry. I think we've also seen the old windrow outdoor composting facilities increasingly switching to more advanced aerated stat pile or covered systems, really because of regulatory reasons. Now, those systems can be very efficient, but they require much more capital, which may make it difficult for some public clients to absorb that cost. So, as Tim said, the facilities have to be good neighbors, but I think all of us as solid waste professionals have to be advocates for a regulatory environment that sort of syncs with what the diversion requirements are, and to be mindful of things like land use. We have some facilities we're working on where one of them where counties allowed homes and condos to be built up around the transfer station. And that's a very difficult situation, even in a perfectly ideal case, to operate a facility with homes surrounding it. So sort of we all have to sort of do our part, I think, to try to protect these facilities and try to make sure the regulatory environment sort of syncs with what the diversion requirements are.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the webinar for the day. I appreciate all the panelists spending time with us and everyone for being on the call. Thank you for taking time out. We will have this available on swanandnorcal.org by next week sometime, even sooner, hopefully. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thanks the staff to helping run this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, guys. Sorry for the technical issues.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.